China has announced it will ban ships from an area north of Taiwan on Sunday due to the possibility of falling rocket debris. Taiwan claims China wants to impose a no-fly zone in the same area. Beijing held 3 days of drills around Taiwan last week, setting nerves on edge. Chinese forces simulated targeted strikes and a blockade of the island that it views as part of its territory. It comes as Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock arrives on a 3-day visit to China. For more now, I can talk with our DW Chief International Editor, Richard Walker. Richard, good to see you. Help us make sense of this announcement. Are we seeing the beginning of a Taiwan blockade, or are we just a little jumpy and this is something a little less serious?
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how these days play out. But, China's indicating that this announcement is about, a space launch, and it's simply about, safety in the region in case there's falling debris from this. But we can definitely see this as kind of part of the Chinese response to this meeting recently between Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen when she was in the United States with the US Speaker of the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy. Now, China doesn't like political contacts between Taiwanese leaders and foreign politicians because they say, Taiwan's part of our territory, you shouldn't be talking to anyone else, that's our business. And we saw this a few months ago when McCarthy's predecessor, Nancy Pelosi, went to Taiwan. There were big military drills by the Chinese around Taiwan. We've seen this also in the past week. And the drills that we saw last week did look like China, trying to sort of essentially practice what it would need to do if it wanted to launch a blockade or if it even wanted to launch an invasion against Taiwan, sort of essentially practicing how it would go about doing that. And what we see with this announcement about Sunday, potentially space launch, whether that's really happening or not, but I think it's interpreted as a signal from the Chinese that if you, the Taiwanese, and the Americans keep holding this sort of meetings, this is the sort of response that you can expect. Right. We are going to, we're going to threaten militarily, and we're going to mess with things in this region. It's going to make it hard for shipping to go through. It's going to disrupt air traffic in this very sensitive region. And this all comes as German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock begins a major visit to China, where she is expected to also raise this? Yeah, that's right. So this is the backdrop very much overshadowing Baerbock's visit. Also in Taiwan itself, there are emergency preparedness drills taking place. So Taiwan very much present in everybody's minds. And in fact, before she even left, Baerbock's spokesperson was talking about, Germany being very concerned about the tensions in the Taiwan Strait, explicitly calling on China to de-escalate, talking about the terrifying scenario, the words that they used, of a potential invasion sometime. Baerbock, we can expect to enforce the German position that stability in this area is very important, that there should be no change in the status quo by force, i.e. China don't invade. I think what we can expect to hear from the Chinese is pretty much what they always say. It's like, this is none of your business. From their point of view, this is part of our territory. It's up to us how we deal with it. And Baerbock's visit comes just days after French President Emmanuel Macron was in Beijing. He was accused of being overly friendly with the Chinese. The optics are so important here. What can we expect from Baerbock? Yeah, so, there's a lot of diplomatic travel going on between Europe and China at the moment. Macron was there. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was there as well. That was supposed to be a visit that was sort of meant to portray Europe with a united position towards China. It ended up doing completely the opposite. Macron said in an interview during that visit to some journalists that he was concerned about Europe kind of getting sort of dragged into a conflict over Taiwan and suggesting that it needs to sort of stand back. Suggesting that there needs to be greater distance between Europe and the United States on policy towards Taiwan and China. This caused outrage in many parts of Europe, saying, look how the US is helping here in Europe over Ukraine. How can we have some kind of an equidistance between the two sides on Taiwan? So Baerbock will be going in there. Baerbock is much more critical of China in general, but the overall picture that we have from Europe on China is one of essentially muddle right now. Chief International Editor Richard Walker, thanks so much.
Now, DW's political correspondent Thomas Sparrow in Berlin and journalist Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing, both following this visit. I started by asking Fabian about the current situation between China and Taiwan ahead of the German foreign minister's visit.
Yeah, the situation has calmed down quite a bit. Initially, Beijing actually planned a no-flight zone on the north of Taiwan between the 16th and 18th of April, but they have made a rare backtrack. Now this no-fly zone will only last half an hour on Sunday, and that gives you an idea that China, on the one hand, showed a lot of military strength during those drills, but also, to some degree, some restraint. What I, however, found really very alarming was the dehumanizing rhetoric that you could see. For example, a high-ranking general of the People's Liberation Army said in the evening news, he compared the independence activists in Taiwan to a cancer that should be surgically removed. So that is really very concerning.
Thomas, what is the likely message that Annalena Baerbock is now bringing to China when it comes to the situation between China and Taiwan?
Essentially, Sarah, that a military escalation is in no one's interest. It's not in China's interest, it's not in Taiwan's interest, it's not in Europe's interest either. And that has to do with the fact that the region plays a vital role when it comes to global trade. That's something that Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister, stressed before she departed to China. Now, more broadly, Germany sees China both as a partner, in particular when it comes to economic relations. And in fact, those economic relations have strengthened reportedly in the last year or so. Yet at the same time, it views China as a systemic rival, as a competitor. And Annalena Baerbock stressed that it was important also for Germany to look at where there are possible risks when it comes to unilateral dependencies. And this is again related to possible escalations in the region. Germany wants to avoid that at all costs because essentially that would also affect Germany's stance internationally.
Thomas, just briefly, a quick follow-up there. She's also likely to discuss the war in Ukraine. What does Germany want to see?
Well, this is also very important because Annalena Baerbock stressed that China plays an important role when it comes to maintaining global peace. China is a member of the UN Security Council. China is also a country, by the way, that has a relationship with Russia. And as such, the role that China could play when it comes to trying to find peace, trying to find a solution to the war in Ukraine is particularly relevant. And that is something that Annalena Baerbock, and by the way, not only Baerbock, other European leaders have tried to achieve the same, is to try and understand what kind of role China could play when it comes to trying to find a solution to the war in Ukraine.
Fabian, how is the German foreign ministers and all of these issues that we've heard are on the table, how are they being perceived in China?
Well, I mean, Baerbock is not very popular here in Beijing. That might not surprise because she's rather outspoken with her criticism. Some even view her as quote-unquote anti-China. But actually, there's a lot of restraint when it comes to covering the visit actually before it starts because, Beijing wants to see how it goes. I mean, nothing is written in stone yet. And for example, the visit by Macron recently really went very well for China. So I think there's still a charm offensive towards the European Union going on, and basically China wants to divide Brussels and Washington. They don't want a transatlantic solidarity. So I think how the state media here will cover and also view the visit will really depend on what outcome it will produce.
And Fabian, we've been seeing Beijing and Moscow put their relations on display since the invasion of Ukraine. How likely is it that the Chinese leadership listens to the Europeans and further presses Russia to end the war?
Well, super unlikely. I mean, we just saw trade numbers coming out today. The bilateral trade between China and Russia has skyrocketed, basically plus 70% since the last year, import and exports. And also the political commitment from Beijing towards Moscow seems rather robust. Just yesterday, I spoke to a high-ranking foreign policy scholar and former ambassador, and I asked the official position, and he basically doubled down on that this war, in Chinese view, is provoked by NATO expansion, that it has to do with the security architecture of Europe, etc. But he did not criticize Russia with one syllable, and that is also the official stance of Xi Jinping. I mean, there's no criticism whatsoever, and Macron failed to get any diplomatic concession from China towards Ukraine. So I don't think, or at least I'm not very hopeful that Baerbock's visit will produce any outcome on this front.
Thank you so much. Fabian Kretschmer in Beijing, DW's Thomas Sparrow in Berlin. Thank you to both of you.